Well, that feels like a minute to me. How about you folks? I think we can begin. Good morning. My name is Councillor Gary Crawford. I'm Chair of the Budget Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we do have quorum, so I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everybody. Today's meeting is being held by video conference. City staff are also connected to the meeting by video conference. As City Hall remains closed, the public will continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. And I ask for everyone's patience, of course, if we experience any technical delays and problems during the meeting. We have each day had a couple of them. So again, just ask for your patience. And I'd ask for staff to keep their mics muted and the videos turned off. So make it easy for me as chair to watch those on YouTube and observe members as they participate in the meeting. Members on the opposite side, can you please leave your videos on with your mics muted while we hear public presentations? And if there's any visiting councillors, please have your videos on so number one, I can see them, the public can see you, and clerks will be able to have your attendance noted. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. First order of business, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we'll proceed. The purpose of today's meeting, which is a special meeting of the Budget Committee to hear public speakers and deputations on the 2021 capital and operating budgets. We have a number of people registered to speak to the Budget Committee today. I believe there's 27 registered for this morning's area. Members of the public are connected to this meeting by phone and computer. The City Clerk has posted the speakers online at toronto.ca/council. You click on the speakers button for the meeting and you'll be able to see the list of names. Now for the public speakers who are here today, I just want to run down what will happen. You are on mute and I will identify you as we go down the list. I will mention 3 or 4 names in advance so you'll get a sense of when you would be up. There's a timer that is I will be following you, so you do have 5 minutes to speak to the Budget Committee. I'll give you a little bit of a nod about 10-15 seconds prior to the 5 minutes if you happen to use that. And then after your deputation or speaking to us, there could be potentially questions from any members. And again, you'll just have to answer those, of course, as best you can. The clerk has also received emails and communications from the public about the 2021 budget. Those communications are available to members on CMP, which is the clerk's meeting portal. And I encourage the public to send their comments to the Budget Committee throughout the process, whether or not you can do it virtually here in front of us or just send it into buc@toronto.ca. And again, this meeting is the public's opportunity to speak about the budget, to give us your views, your opinions on the budget that we are moving through right now. Budget Committee will be doing 2 final wrap-ups next week and the week after, and then this will be going to so on January 28th and February 4th will be wrap-up meetings. We will be sending our recommendations off to the Executive Committee and then from there off to full council. Members are welcome, by the way, Mayor Tory, also to the deputations today, but are there any questions on the process? We've been through it once or twice, so I think we all know what to expect. Great. What I'll do now is I will go to the speakers list. Give me a sec here. I just have to bring it up. And again, we have 27 speakers who are registered. And I'll do the first 3 first so you know who's coming up. The first speaker will be Maya Kantharupan, Annie Hodgins, and Jonathan Lopez will be the first 3 speakers. So Maya, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Great. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. So my name is Maya Kantharupan, and I'm a passionate resident of Ward 10 in the beautifully diverse community of the Esplanade and St. Lawrence. As a queer person of color and child of immigrant settlers granted many privileges in life, I have watched my surrounding community change significantly over the last 5 years. Now in this pandemic and with heightened awareness of the threat to Black and Indigenous lives, I have felt rage and disappointment at the lack of support for communities most vulnerable. And let's be clear, vulnerability is a policy choice. So knowing the good fortune and support for my family and community are the reason I even have the privilege to be speaking today is the reason I am doing so. This is my first time giving a deputation, but not my first time watching City Council live streams for hours on end. Catalyzed by the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette and incredible showings of community support across the GTA, a motion was finally brought forth in June 2020 to defund the police by a modest 10%. What became very clear through witnessing this experience was that the City Council had little to no idea what police funding was actually being used for, and the discourse around this was exceptionally shallow. Were we really still solely focused on the perceived merits of policing? Support for the motion brought forth countless stories of experiences with the police and the byproducts of policing, and I had hopes that the problem, and therefore the solution, were now clear. Obviously, the City Council did not pass that motion, but the city also failed to simply promise to consult with Black, Indigenous, and racialized community leaders and experts on alternatives for policing. This motion read, City Council direct the city manager to work with Black, Indigenous, and people of color community-led organizations, mental health, restorative justice, and legal experts to identify alternative 911 and other emergency responses to replace armed officers to de-escalate and triage non-criminal incidents of crisis involving mental health and addictions, the homeless, school disciplines, and neighbor disputes. Do our 25 city councilors really feel like they can do a fine job understanding the vast diversity of needs across their ridings without this input? Isn't that part of the reason that we're here today? I digress. In the same breath, City Council voted to implement body-worn cameras despite report findings, the kind that we love to fund and then do nothing with, that body-worn cameras simply do not meaningfully address the challenges of an already overfunded police force. You may be wondering why I bring all of this up, so I'd like to read a direct quote from Mayor Tory in your letter to City Council regarding changes to policing in Toronto from June. We must do more, because systemic racism threatens equal rights, justice, and well-being of Indigenous, Black, and marginalized communities. It leaves communities disengaged, poorly served, or alienated from services in their neighborhoods and the city as a whole. As mayor, I am committed to listening, to learning, and to taking concrete actions that will improve the day-to-day lives of Indigenous, Black, and other marginalized Torontonians. To the tens of thousands of Torontonians who have called and emailed my office and the offices of my council colleagues over the past few weeks, and to those of you who have peacefully taken to the streets to march and protest, I want you to know that I see you, I hear you, and I'm listening. In all honesty, John, what could you possibly be listening for? What is the sign that you all need? Would City Council even be able to recognize it if presented to you? It may not be in your power or ability to understand the lives and needs of Black, Indigenous, or vulnerable constituents as much as you understand your wealthy and or white ones. But lucky for you, your constituents are showing up to assist you so you all too can be focused on action. And trust me, you have been presented with more than enough information than you could ever need to act. The time for tables and inquiries and listening and learning is over. The folks connected to their communities will always find ways to create meaningful change, but this process has been and remains the only avenue for us to actually seek change with regards to funding allocation. So I stand in solidarity with the demands of Black Lives Matter Toronto to defund Toronto Police Services by a minimum of 50% immediately, with the eventual goal of fully divesting from and abolishing the police as we know it today. That $500 million must be reallocated to necessary supports and services that will have been advocated for over these few days. This is a bare minimum first step from a committee whose purpose is to scrutinize the budget in support of the will of the people. And frankly, it's an easy win for you. Up until this point, you've been given the benefit of the doubt that you may lack the imagination, precedent, or the practice when it comes to defunding, things that for argument's sake could be acceptable for a time because decolonization is hard work. But now you are on notice. It is now your responsibility to do better with the power you continue to be permitted. As someone said yesterday, institutions are neither permanent nor irreplaceable. And if the mayor can openly agree that in systemic racism, which absolutely includes the institution of policing, leaves communities disengaged, poorly served, or alienated from services in their neighborhoods and the city as a whole, then this lack of action, especially in 2021, feels like you're kind of okay with that. So I'll close by asking, what will be on the record as proof of what you did with the power you held in a time when folks needed you most? That you sat back and said it was too difficult, or that you boldly took a stand and said, we will no longer be complicit? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Are there questions? Seeing none, appreciate your time with us today, Maya. We'll go on to the next speaker. Any Hodgins, sorry, with the Center for Equality, Rights and Accommodation. Any of you there?
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can hear you. You got 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. So thanks for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name's Annie Hodgins, and this morning I'm speaking on behalf of the Right to Housing Toronto. It's a coalition of organizations and individuals working to support the implementation of the right to adequate housing by the City of Toronto. So the city's progress on your commitment to the progressive realization of the right to housing continues to move in the right direction, and this progress couldn't come at a more crucial time, as I'm sure everyone's aware. Emergency housing issues like encampments, the need for access to adequate housing, the prospect of mass evictions into homelessness, and access to shelters have reached a critical point, as we all know. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the impacts of housing insecurity, especially for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in Toronto, and has demonstrated that ensuring the right to adequate housing is crucial to the well-being of all citizens of Toronto. So today we wanted to urge City Council to commit to establishing and fully resourcing an Office of the Housing Commissioner through the current budget cycle. The priorities for this year's budget include managing the impact of COVID-19 and ensuring recovery, in addition to building a prosperous Toronto with a focus on equity. These priorities can't be accomplished without prioritizing inclusive, equitable, and adequate housing, as I think everyone knows. The establishment and full resourcing of the Office of a Housing Commissioner would ensure accountability, transparency, and action on finding effective, equitable, and human rights-based solutions to the above priorities. This office would play a key role in monitoring the city's progress on the Housing TO 2020-2030 targets and timelines, and receive information and submissions from human rights holders and advocates, and identify and review systemic violations of the right to housing, making recommendations to council on necessary measures to meet the city's human rights obligations. The office would also make sure the city is better positioned to address the negative impacts of future pandemics and health crises. We believe that the immediate establishment of a housing commissioner is an urgent matter and must be prioritized by the city during the upcoming budget cycle. The Office of the Housing Commissioner will be a key accountability mechanism of the city's human rights-based approach to housing policy, a necessary and crucial mechanism for dealing with long-term and emergency housing and homelessness issues that have arisen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. An Office of the Housing Commissioner can make sure that correct measures are in place and inclusive, and that equity-based targets are met, and will be able to provide proactive recommendations to guide sustainable and effective housing policy. Crucially, the Office of the Housing Commissioner will also be positioned to provide human rights-based guidance during times of crisis. This guidance is critical for ensuring efforts like transitioning shelter residents into permanent housing, addressing the housing inequities of Black renter households as documented by the Wellesley Institute, and addressing the looming evictions crisis, align with the city's commitment to a rights-based approach to housing policy. We envision the Housing Commissioner's role to include the power to monitor, claim, and enforce the inclusive and equitable human right to adequate housing across Toronto, with the ability to recommend corrective actions to systemic barriers. Creating and adequately resourcing an Office of the Housing Commissioner will allow the city to approach systemic and ongoing housing problems from a proactive, equity-based position, and with a focus on addressing housing inequity and inadequacy faced by residents and communities who have been marginalized by systems of poverty and housing insecurity. We urge members of this committee to reflect on how much better positioned the city would have been to address systemic issues made worse by COVID-19 if a commissioner's office had been in place throughout the pandemic. We understand the city is facing unique and unprecedented challenges relating to their budget, and because of this, we echo the city's continued calls for increased support from the provincial and federal governments to help with the housing and homelessness challenges facing Toronto. Establishing a fully resourced Office of the Housing Commissioner is critical to help navigate through these challenges. We urge this committee and members of City Council to establish and adequately resource this office without further delay. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning on behalf of the Right to Housing Toronto.
Thank you very much. We do have a question so far right now from Councillor Layton. Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Budget Chief. Annie, thank you for the presentation. I think, at least in questioning of staff, on the budget, it seems less about resources and more about the time it's going to take to determine what it might cost to put this office in play. And as you might recall, when we originally debated this, we kind of a motion was tabled that said put some money aside for it when we're ready. Then we were told this year would be the year that we execute for obvious reasons. Like there's been some delays, but I agree with you that I think our jobs would have been made much easier had we had this position. So what are there any models we can look to in other municipalities or agencies in North America, around the world, that we can that can help guide us in the level of investment we need and in how to implement an office of a housing commissioner? I ask you because it sounds like there's a debate going on internally to the city that is this a job that another staff member or a current staff member can do or a current division can do, rather than establish a brand new set of staffing and resources. So I'm just wondering, is there guidance you can give us on this that might help us roll this out faster?
Thanks for the question. The Right to Housing Toronto actually has put together a briefing on models that could be looked to and what the office might possibly look like. There are some precedents in the international sphere, and apologies, I don't remember offhand from where, but they are included in our note. So there is some guidance available, and we've been doing some work on that. So we're happy to, and we have been in some conversations with city staff. So we're happy to sort of share that as is helpful, because there is some guidance available.
I think that would be really helpful if you haven't shared it with councillors, if you could, and then I'll seek it out on is it from the Center for Equity Rights? It's actually Right to Housing this report?
It's Right to Housing Toronto, but it's been, we can share it with you. It's not sort of been publicly available. Yeah.
Okay, I can find it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Seeing none, thanks, Annie. Next is Jonathan Robart. Jonathan, you with us today? From the,
good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
That's great. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Jonathan. I'm here on behalf of the Center for Equality of Rights and Accommodation. We're a not-for-profit charitable organization, and we've been working to advance the right to housing for over 30 years. I want to begin by acknowledging that the city's progress on a number of issues related to housing does continue to move in the right direction. We are pleased to see the city stepping up, especially to fulfill their commitment to the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing. We commend members of City Council and city staff on the work undertaken to date, and especially given the difficult circumstances imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. All of the efforts could not have come at a more crucial time. We're seeing the dual crisis of access to adequate housing and a growing threat of mass evictions into homelessness, and these crises demand immediate and sustained action. When residents of our city are faced with limited access to affordable and adequate housing, they may have no choice but to live in uninhabitable housing, and they're also placed at constant risk of experiencing homelessness. The city's Housing TO 2020 to 2030 plan and the stated goals of providing 18,000 affordable and supportive housing opportunities, creating 600 units of supportive housing, and preventing 10,000 evictions for low-income households are laudable, but the city has to support these goals by committing to dedicating the maximum of its available resources to ensuring everyone has equitable access to adequate housing. And on that note, we do echo the city's continued calls for increased support from the provincial and federal government to assist with this commitment. Over the past decade, CIRA has watched as the circumstances of people who call our eviction prevention hotline have become progressively complex, urgent, and desperate. The fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic and the passage of Bill 184 by the Ontario government, combined with increasingly unaffordable and inadequate housing across the city, has resulted in an unprecedented demand on our eviction prevention services. As the pandemic continues to wreak havoc on the city's most vulnerable, and more people and tenants are facing eviction, services like those provided by CIRA and other organizations are likely to remain oversubscribed. This demand will only continue to grow without further investment by the city in eviction prevention programs and services. And given the above, we're recommending the city continue to move forward with creative and expansive ways to prevent evictions as a key tool in the fight to protect affordable rental housing and prevent homelessness. This begins by committing funding during this budget cycle for the immediate expansion of the eligibility criteria and parameters for eviction prevention programs like the Rent Bank and the Eviction Prevention in the Community, or EPIC. Increasing the maximum allowable loans and allowing greater flexibility regarding repayment strategies will adapt the Toronto Rent Bank to meet the challenges associated with widespread job loss and accumulation of higher than average rental arrears resulting from the pandemic. Shifting the structure of the Rent Bank from a loan-based program into a grants-based program will ensure tenants can stabilize their tenancies without being burdened by unsustainable debt. We also urge members of the City Council to support the expansion and coordination of eviction prevention services to ensure a growing number of agencies that serve as tenants' first point of contact can reach tenants in need of these services. CIRA and other frontline service providers you will hear from over the course of these consultations have the skills and expertise to address the needs of those facing housing insecurity, but we need resources and the support from you to provide these essential services. And of course, we look forward to continuing to work with every member of City Council to prevent evictions and strive towards the progressive realization of the right to housing. We know that residents, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I thought you were finished.
That's okay, thank you. We know that residents need access to eviction prevention measures very early in the eviction process to avoid crisis situations where they may lose their housing. And to ensure these measures reach tenants in a timely way, information and education about these measures need to be available in a low barrier and accessible manner. The priorities that emerge from the current budget cycle will speak volumes about the city's willingness to fulfill its commitment to the progressive realization of the right to housing. The housing crisis in Toronto is a human rights crisis, and we can't forget that. We urge the city to confront this crisis right now and consider immediate and increased investments towards securing the housing rights of all residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Other questions? Excellent, thank you. Next three deputants are Scout S, Johan Denora, and Lynn Adamson. Scout, are you there? Scout S? One more time, maybe if Scout, we've been having technical difficulties where they can hear me speaking, but their mics aren't working. So Scout, if you're having an issue, just log off and, oh, sorry. Can we hear you? We can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Great. Just let me know when to start.
You can start whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, my name is Scout, and I'm a resident of Ward 3. I'm speaking today because I'm extremely passionate about my community, my neighbors, and the people in the city. Like many others, I have major concerns about the city's priorities as indicated in this budget presentation and the entire communities that it doesn't serve. Please do not dismiss or ignore us today. We see you playing on your phones. We have to prepare our days around this. We work and we are people, and this budget represents many people's lives. We come to speak here because we're concerned about our community's safety and well-being. And yesterday, I lost count of the number of residents imploring this committee to take steps to ensure that there is necessary funding for essential community supports and services. And many of them beg you to defund the police by 50% towards that goal. I join them in that call. Yesterday, for the entire day, you heard from residents who know that this budget fails them. You heard from TTC users, parents, environmentalists, outreach and housing and shelter workers, renters and homeowners. You heard from youth, the elderly, newcomer and immigrant communities, and longtime residents who volunteered their free time to support people living in encampments unpaid, who the city has decided are their enemies. We need you to invest in us. This budget puts people at risk, and as Maya said previously, people are not inherently at risk. People in power like yourselves make it so. So do our communities not matter? This budget reduces funding and supports to childcare services, limits growth in necessary housing supports, employment supports, community and social services, and parks. And at the core, like so many others have said, this budget maintains levels of policing that have been proven to be racist, violent, and out of control. In the year of a global pandemic, over $1 billion on policing. Even with no increase, it is the biggest budget line item. Does that even take into account the tens of millions that police get from other levels of government? You can sit back and claim that you're contractually bound to salaries and whatnot. Gut it. The Rethinking Community Safety Report offers a very clear way forward to reduce spending on policing and create better outcomes. But will you even consider these well thought out alternatives? We have so many reports gathering dust, so many recommendations, and where are they in this budget? You are investing our money into a service that does not even do its job well, that brings violence and terror to so many residents in this city. We do not want these piecemeal reforms. We do not want to wait decades. We want a 50% cut to police services now. I want the weapons budget gone. I do not want police to kill another Black or Indigenous or disabled or trans person or a person going through a mental health crisis ever again. I want there to be childcare for those who need it, homes for those who need it, dignified employment for those who need it, food security, public health and harm reduction services for those who need it, clean and welcoming libraries. And you're telling me that the millionaires in the city will see a 0.7% property tax increase? Who is this budget for? Can you really say that this budget addresses the growing inequities in this city? I can't tell you how frustrating it is to watch the people who are meant to be representing my interests take the same meaningless actions that have widened the inequality in the city over years. Maybe some of you don't remember or know what it's like to be at the mercy of representatives so dedicated to the status quo that privileges some over others. Some of you have been in power for decades. Some of you were born into it. And one of you has been in power since before I was born, and I am in my 30s. We know that COVID-19 pressures are putting our entire city's functioning at risk with a budget shortfall. And what we are seeing is the city's unwillingness to take meaningful action to offset this shortfall and ensure that programs, services, and supports for the city's most underserved residents are protected and bolstered when needed most. A large majority of the speakers that you've heard from have indicated that this budget does not do enough, does not take enough bold action to radically change and stop the widening gaps of inequality in the city. The gap between rich and poor in the city are just growing, and we need immediate action to change it. So please take that action now. That's all.
Thank you very much, Scout. Are there questions? Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Scout. Scout, yesterday a couple of those millionaires were amongst the deputants, and both of them said, I don't know if they had talked to each other beforehand or not, but both of them said at the very least, you have to begin to feed all those needs by putting more into the base of the city's budget. And so both of them, you would assume, pay fairly high property taxes because based on the wards they said they were from, they both said at the very least, charge me 1.5% plus the city building fund instead of 0.7 plus the city building fund. Should we listen to them?
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, we might not be able to do as much as you want us to do immediately and in 1 year, but that would at least begin to protect the services that you've just described and allow us to be more generous about the police reform work that we are doing on the city side. We heard from a deputant yesterday that he was glad to see the report that's coming to executive on Wednesday to begin the work to start a civilian mental health crisis response, but that the pilot was going to be underfunded. So you'd like to see more funds going into that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't understand how a 3-person pilot will work, but let's just hope that those people can do the best work they can.
Thank you. Thanks for coming this morning.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Scout. Next is Johan Denora. Johan Denora.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go
All
ahead.
right. Good morning, councillors, members of the committee. My name is Johan Denora. I'm a resident of Ward 9, and I'm asking you to defund the Toronto Police Service by 50% in 2021 and reallocate that 50% of funding to meet community needs and strengthen public services for marginalized communities, Black, Indigenous, racialized, and poor, no-income and low-income folks. I volunteer for a helpline that's widely used in Toronto. We regularly get calls from folks in crisis and in dire need of emergency support, either for themselves or their loved ones. Unfortunately, due to the city's lack of investment in mental health services and overinvestment in the police, oftentimes the only option I can offer these callers is for them to call 911. When callers hear this and hear that there is no guarantee that police will not be sent to respond, they become scared. And why shouldn't they be scared? When we've seen time and again that when police get involved in mental health emergencies, people die. I've heard from councillors about the development of non-police-led crisis response models. I've seen proposals from a coalition of community organizations for the piloting of 4 mobile crisis response teams. These measures sound good, but where will the money come from to properly fund these proposals and ensure their success? There's only so much money in the city budget, and with policing taking up the lion's share of it, it seems all other services, proposals, and alternatives will only ever be begging for scraps. A commitment to these alternatives requires a commitment to defunding the police and thoughtfully reallocating those funds. This city has criminalized its marginalized and vulnerable citizens and thus created an artificial need for policing. We've criminalized homelessness, but underfunded affordable housing and shelters. We've criminalized poverty by relying on fair inspectors and TPC cops. We've criminalized drug use and underfunded mental health services. We've put cops in our schools and criminalized children seeking education. All the while, the police budget looms large over all these chronically underfunded services. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. People are dying because of council's allocation of resources. The only way to solve the problem is to move funds away from the police and towards services that actually respond to the community's needs, towards mental health services, nonviolent crisis response, affordable and social housing, free transit, food security, education. Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks in the city have been saying this for decades. They have borne the brunt of police violence forever. They've told you what you need. However, instead of listening to these concerns from the people most qualified to raise them, our overwhelmingly white city council voted against last June's proposed meager 10% CPS budget cut. Instead of defunding, city councilors brought forward yet another series of reform decisions. Instead of defunding, money was allocated to procure body cameras, which studies have already shown have very little effect on police accountability. Instead of defunding, officers were added to the CPS payroll. Councillor Bradford, instead of defunding, you and Division 55 Superintendent Strobel, quote, secured funds for 4 new neighborhood police officers in your local Beaches East York community. What happened to the support and clarity of purpose you expressed on your blog in the lead up to that June 2020 vote? And the same question to you, Councillor Layton. You were in favor of that proposal, but since then, what have you done to move the needle on the issue of defunding? Have you moved on from the issue? Pardon me, need to breathe. The motion failed and now your commitment is gone. You may be able to walk away from this, but the same can't be said for your constituents who will continue to be negatively affected by the police. You decide when that stops. Time and again, councillors say they're listening to marginalized voices. But if that were true, there would not be debate on this issue. If that were true, these endless motions of reform would not be written up in favor of defunding. Support for defunding will not stop growing. You have the opportunity right now to do the right thing. Thank you.
Very much for your deputation. Are there questions? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you, Jonah. Did you realize that just 3 days ago I put forward a motion trying to get more information about how we could defund quicker?
Yeah, pardon me. I will say a lot of this was written like several days ago. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you being clear on that. I suppose what I'm asking for is like more frequent and public support for defunding. If last June you were in favor of that, that goes for all councils that were in favor.
The next opportunity to engage on this very issue is right here and in the report going to executive committee tomorrow. And so I would encourage you to participate in both those discussions, as I will be, and over the last couple of months have been working closely with some of the organizations that are putting forward alternative proposals. So not all of it happens in committee meetings, and anything that we brought forward to defund the budget would have been out of order according to our own procedural guidelines, because we have voted on that within the last 12 months. So this is the rightful place to have that discussion, and that's why at our last budget meeting, I moved the motions I did. They did fail, however.
Well, I asked the question, you answered it. I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, we'll go on to the next. Oh, Lynn, hold on. My computer just froze. Give me 1 sec here. Yes, Lynn Adamson is next from Climate Fast. Lynn, are you there?
Yes.
We can hear you. Great.
Okay,
So
great. Thank
you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of Climate Fast. We're a community organization working for fast action on the climate crisis since 2012. I live in Toronto, St. Paul's, and we have members all across the city. We have followed the city's development of the Transform TO climate plan since 2015. We commend City Council for the Transform TO plan, the declaration of climate emergency, the Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild report recommendations, and our mayor's support shown in signing the C40 mayor's statement for building back better from the pandemic. Council's statements are very positive. However, we still do not see the commitment to implementation of solutions at the scale and pace required. To lead the way to a healthier and more sustainable future, we need to take bold action. We need to be consistent in what we say and what we actually do and what we fund. So that's the importance of the budget. So what will life be like in future Toronto 10 or 20 years from now? If you have my submission, you'll see the chart from Transform TO showing the extreme heat that we'll be getting, the extent of hot days and heat waves, and the 3 times higher daily maximum rainfall in 2040, 20 years from now. So think when our children are that age, that's what they're going to experience. We can help reduce that through our actions taken today. The next one illustrates globally that we're already at an increase of 1.2 Celsius, and what that means for the health of the planet. It's quite worrisome. So how are we doing in doing our part in the City of Toronto? So we aren't doing all that well. Although the overall trend is down, which is good, but we actually saw an uptick in emissions in 2018. And we know that changes are coming in the electricity grid that could threaten the progress that we have made. So we need to do more. So what can we do? You'll see there that I've made some notes about the climate emergency declaration steps that we're committed to. However, the city has stalled in terms of carrying these out. That is due to COVID. We understand that, but we just cannot leave it like that. So I've put the understanding of where those commitments are in my submission. So now I'm coming to our recommendations. So we recommend that you really increase revenue, increase the property tax rate and parking levy, and there may be other sources of revenue that you should be looking into, what other sources of revenue they may be. With the property tax increase of just 0.7%, that is $22 per year for an average household. The city building levy of 1.5% for housing and transit. However, this is very limited given the needs of the city. We propose an additional 1% property tax increase to restore $30 million in needed funds for community services and funding for the environment and energy budget. In that budget, environment and energy budget, we need to restore the $2.5 million proposed cut from the planned 2021 budget. We need to make up for lost time here. So we need to make the planned staff hires that were in Transform TO plan before the pandemic. We need to do that so the climate emergency commitments are not delayed. It would be a really good idea to shift money from the gardener to active transportation to advance equity, health, and resilience in our city, and from law enforcement to meeting needs for a healthy city. So there's less need to call on the police. when we invest in the gardener, we send a message that cars are important, and we take money away from the shift we need to make to active transportation. We suggest establishing a dedicated climate fund. It could be 1%, this 1% that we're talking about, or this year it could be a combination emergency fund for relief for vulnerable citizens, relief from the COVID, and that means food security, housing, transit, and other needs that need the funding, in addition to the $2.5 million back into environment and energy budget.
You'll have to wrap up, please.
Oh, wrap up, sorry.
Yep.
We suggest green bonds, community grant program, nature-based solutions, a climate, health, and equity lens to all spending decisions. I've talked about the funding needs, and I enclosed a photo of my youngest grandson, and that's what we're doing this for, our children. So please keep them in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, appreciate your time to be with us today. The next three speakers are Val Endicott, Vanessa Conley, and Liz Addison. We'll begin with Val Endicott. You there, Val?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Can you
you
hear
have
me?
5 minutes? Yeah, we can hear you clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts. My name is Val Endicott, and I am a recently retired kindergarten teacher. I have been a resident of Toronto St. Paul's all of my life, and this is my first ever deputation. In the months before COVID-19 struck us, there was tremendous momentum here in Toronto and across the world to finally do something before it's too late about the climate crisis. You all voted to declare a climate emergency here. Then we were sickened by a disease that arises out of the very imbalance between us and the natural world that is creating the climate crisis. And in the course of fighting this disease, many of white middle-class people like myself were more starkly than ever confronted with the reality of systemic racism. The fact that COVID-19 and the climate crisis disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, and racialized peoples is no coincidence. It's rooted in our society and our economic system. So it is at this historic moment of a convergence of three interrelated crises that I exhort you as leaders of this city to rise to the occasion and boldly prepare a budget that will allow us to build back better than before. We cannot go back to what was. While demanding aid from other levels of government is very important, there are also many things that Toronto City Council can do to meet these existential crises, and I am counting on you to show leadership in the following ways. Reallocate the funds that we do have at our disposal. Shift spending from law enforcement to housing, mental health, food security, and other programs that advance the equity, health, and resilience of vulnerable communities. I fully support the Black Lives Movement's demand that you begin the process of defunding the police budget by a minimum of 50%. I was very moved by the speakers that have gone before me today. An emergency requires us to think again about priorities. Can we justify the continued expenditure of almost half of the city's transportation budget on the Gardiner Expressway when we are in desperate need of improving public transportation and biking infrastructure, to name two things? Be courageous. Significantly raise the property taxes. Most property owners in Toronto can afford something more than a 0.7% increase. It's a crisis. Many people are more willing than you think. Surely even 1.7% or more would not be too much to ask. And for those who can't afford it, we know there are cancellation and deferral programs. Use the $30 million that would be raised from an additional 1.0% tax increase to fund emergency housing, food security, and child care support for those most affected by the pandemic. And use some of it to reverse the planned cut of $2.5 million from the Environment and Energy Division's budget so that Transform TO's work is not delayed. Now, imagine for a moment how seriously leaning into to greening our city will aid us in all three of the crises we face. Imagine a 21-kilometer greenway through the very underserved northwest region of Toronto. It would be a pathway lined by shade trees and rain gardens, allowing people to exercise and access their food supply and other basic needs by bicycle, allowing small businesses to serve people closer to home in food stands along the way. It would mean a bridge over the 400 to link communities cut off from each other at present. This is the vision of our Greenway Conservancy that will actually not even need a line on your budget ledger, because tired of waiting, they will seek private funding. But I would personally pay more taxes to help make this vision a reality. Imagine other nature-based solutions. How about healthy ravines? The ravine strategy needs funding now. How about more green roofs? The green roof bylaw should be expanded using incentives for greater impact. More green roofs means more stormwater filtration, pollinator habitat, and even carbon capture.
To conclude,
you are the leaders of a world-class C40 city. Toronto must lead by example, while also demanding much-needed funds from the other governments. We must build back better. We have no choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Great. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll, go ahead.
Thanks. Good morning, Val. Thanks for joining us. We have the conversation about property tax every year because we launch and we tell people what the property tax increase will be, and then it's a real uphill climb to consider anything else. So you mentioned that you would be willing to pay more than 0.7%. Right now it's 0.7% plus the city building fund, which makes the total increase is 2.25. Yesterday, a couple of deputants who both live sort of midtown, both of them said, why not at least go up to making it 1.5% property tax plus the building fund? That would really just mean going from 2.25 to 3%. Would that be something that you would feel confident talking to your neighbors about? Would that be comfortable and lead us to the budgets that are truly status quo or more investment, as opposed to status quo really means less?
I would totally endorse 3%, and I believe that my neighbors would do so too. I think that people, who don't recognize how critical taxes are might be more willing to listen these days as a result of the damage of COVID, for example. So I think that
they're seeing it.
Yeah, people's eyes have been open, and I think that people are ready to pay more. Our housing in Toronto is an incredible asset to the people who own them, and the people who don't have that money. There are ways for them to not have to pay the extra taxes. So I think that people are feeling generous, and they should be asked to pay 3%.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming this morning, Val.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
Next is Vanessa Conley. Vanessa Conley.
Hello, can you hear me?
Vanessa. We can hear you well. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi there, my name is Vanessa Conley. I live in Ward 9. I am a passionate member of my community. It's really hard coming to these and not feeling frustrated by the process, and feeling disrespected by our council members, because it is evident over and over again that you don't respect us, you don't respect our communities. But I will go through the process in hopes that the repeated messaging will get through to council, and you will finally have the courage to make changes for the communities you serve and not just for your wealthy friends. But so far and continually, you make it hard to believe that any of you care about change. So I beg of you, change our minds. I will give the lot of you the benefit of the doubt and surmise that you got into politics to make a change. Well, now is your chance. As per Black Lives Matter Toronto demands, I am here to also demand a 50% decrease of the Toronto Police Service in this city budget. Those funds need to be reallocated to services that strengthen communities, strengthen public services for marginalized communities, for our Black communities, for our Indigenous communities, for our racialized communities, for our low-income communities, for our unhoused communities. We are a community, and I stand with these communities in their fight for equity. This budget continues to demonstrate the unwillingness of the city to take care of its citizens and its blatant disrespect to Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities that have been demanding these changes for a long time. I would like to ask, where and how, or where does the data that dictates and plays a role in the decisions made in council? Because a very quick Google search on my end, there were more articles that support housing as a means to end poverty than increased policing. Now, I'm not a scholar, I don't have a degree, but I can deduce that funding housing is going to be better for a community than funding the police. Move those funds to mental health services, nonviolent crisis response, affordable and social housing, free transit, food security, and education. In a recent town hall, Councillor Bailau said in response to a question about defunding the police and moving towards community safety models that she, quote, believes things are moving in that direction. So is that to say that everyone on council is aware of the same information on Google that I am? And is aware that an overwhelming amount of constituents are asking for changes, but you're just like waiting or unsure of what to do? There is more than enough information out there, and you have seen it. You have seen it. So what are you waiting for? People are being murdered by the very institution you fund. How are you okay with that? Say their names with me. Ijaz Chowdhury, Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Jamal Francisque, DeAndre Campbell. Those are just from the GTA in the last year. Remember when Councillor Matwell and Wong Tam's motion for a 10% decrease and a disarming of police didn't pass? What? And then none of you have publicly or in a meaningful way pursued that concept any further? Well, we remember. And we demand that you act and that you act with urgency. Otherwise, you are actively choosing to uphold a white supremacist system. You are actively choosing to uphold a racist system. You are actively choosing the harm inflicted on civilians by the police that you fund. If you're not sure where to start with cuts, here's a suggestion. Now, on the last time I researched this, there was $45 million spent on the horse cop unit, the unit that literally serves no purpose and leaves horse shit all over the city that no one cleans up. As someone from Southern Alberta that has spent a lot of time on ranches, I can assure you that if you actually cared about those horses, you would put them in a pasture. This is one of the many examples of how grossly overfunded the Toronto Police Service is. I urge this committee and city council to step it up, be actual leaders or be irrelevant. A 0% increase isn't good enough. Defund the Toronto Police Service by 50% and invest in communities. Thank you for listening. I yield my remaining time.
Very much. Questions? Seeing next, next will be Liz Addison from the Climate Action Club of the Life Institute. Liz, are you there? Liz, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me
We
now?
can hear you. You
Yeah.
are all set to go.
Fantastic. Okay, good morning. My name is Liz Addison, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the 90 active members of the Life Institute's Climate Action Club. The Life Institute is a mature adult learning center affiliated with Ryerson University. As seniors, we're already seeing the devastating impacts of climate change in Canada and around the globe. We're very concerned about the world we'll be leaving to the next generation. We appreciate that the city is dealing with the most difficult budget it has faced in decades, and that you have some very tough choices to make. But time is not on our side, and we can't afford to delay taking action to address climate change. If we delay, the cost to our economy, to human health, and the environment will be immense. Toronto's Transform TO plan set bold targets, but now we need a much more detailed plan to actually achieve those targets. This plan must include actions that are specific and measurable, with clear timelines and responsibilities. Some measures don't even require money. They just need regulations, incentives, and bylaws. The plan must enable everyone involved to be motivated and held accountable, including the private and nonprofit sectors. We can't stress enough how essential it is to maintain funding for the city's environment and energy division, so that at the very least they have the resources this year to prepare the net zero emissions strategy we badly need and that the city has promised. Work should also begin on a low carbon job strategy and establishment of a dedicated carbon fund. At this critical time, the city's climate action commitments must be upheld and all decisions must be viewed through a climate lens. We know that other jurisdictions, such as Vancouver, New Zealand, and members of the EU are leading the way in addressing the climate crisis. We should adapt their practices for the City of Toronto. With your leadership, Toronto can become a global leader too. There are solutions available to reduce our city's carbon emissions, but we need a clear strategy and a commitment to get there. We need our city councillors to provide the necessary leadership, resources, and innovative approaches to avoid the worst consequences of climate disruption. We can't wait. This really is a crisis like no other. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Very much, Liz. Any questions? Great. Let's go through the next three speakers. They are Brandon Haynes, Diane Janssen, and Sharon Bitter or Biter, one of the two. Brandon Haynes from the Toronto Public Library Workers Union, Local 4948. Are you there? Brandon, are you connected?
Hello, Chair. This is Mel with the City Clerk's Office. Brandon is currently connected and his mic is unmuted.
Oh, thank you very much. Brandon, can you hear my voice? Well, he may not necessarily be at his desk. So what I'll do, clerks, if he does respond back to you, then we can add him later. Next is Diane Jansen.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you great, Diane. Go ahead.
My name is Diane Jensen. I live in Ward 12 and work at a poverty reduction organization in Ward 9. I am deputing to a city committee for the first time today because I believe that the Toronto Police Service's proposed budget is much too large. My background is Mennonite. For those of you who don't know, pacifism is an important aspect of the Mennonite faith identity. I've lived out my belief in nonviolent alternatives to violence. I spent 3.5 years of my life volunteering in a conflict zone, accompanying civilians, and documenting human rights violations. I know from personal experience that communities felt safer with a nonviolent, unarmed, protective presence. They were able to go about their daily activities with less fear, whether it was children going to school or families working on their land. They were able to breathe more easily. We also interacted with armed state and non-state individuals, some visibly shaking with their fingers on the triggers of their guns. But when they saw members of our unarmed group, they too could breathe easier because they knew with certainty that there was absolutely no way that we would kill them. Breathe, a word that resonated this past summer. Take a moment with me for a deep breath. Now imagine if you lived every day with the possibility hanging over you that an encounter with an armed police officer could result in violence and you gasping for air. In Toronto, 60% of deadly encounters with police and 70% of fatal police shootings involve Black people, making them nearly 20 times more likely than a white person to be involved in a fatal shooting. In solidarity with Black Lives Matter Toronto's 2020 public demands, I call on you to prioritize the safety and well-being of our neighbors and community members who are disproportionately bear the brunt of systemic racism, ongoing surveillance, criminalization, and violence in policing. Redirect 50% of the 2021 Toronto Police Services budget to communities to resource vital initiatives and social services that allow them to thrive. You can't reform or train away racism and violence in a policing system that at its core was created and continues to protect and privilege citizens with whiter skin and with more property and possessions. I quote from the Toronto Police Services The Way Forward report from 2017. The evidence and best practices from other jurisdictions and organizations confirm that the limits of the existing model of policing have been reached. The answer to outdated service delivery cannot simply be more public funding. To contain costs and ensure value for money, fundamental change is needed, end quote. In addition to spending my time with my boots on the ground doing unarmed protective presence, I also have a master's degree in peace studies. I've delved into the theory behind nonviolent conflict and crisis intervention and documentation from it being put into practice around the world. There are proven models out there that work. The Rethinking Community Safety report that a coalition of 20 community groups released this month outlines immediate steps for alternatives to different aspects of our existing police system. One thing I know for certain is that if you try to use nonviolent methods, but you've kept that gun in your back pocket, you will always be able to justify using that gun. It's only when you lock that gun up and throw the key away will you fully embrace new methods and the creativity of trying all kinds of nonviolent ways to address a situation you face. So I feel like the Toronto City Councillors and Mayor are faced with a choice. If you go forward with the 2021 Toronto Police budget as it is, even with all manner of language about police reform, the loaded gun is still in your back pocket. Little will change for the safety and security of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Toronto. Demonstrate to us that you are bringing about fundamental change to how policing and community safety is done in this city. Defund the police by 50%. Thank you for listening.
Much, Diane. Other questions? Great. Next will be Sharon Bider. Sharon, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Sharon Bider. I'm a resident of Ward 11, a mother and a grandmother, and a climate activist. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee on the crucial 2021 City of Toronto budget. Yesterday marked 1 year since the first COVID case in Canada was confirmed, and COVID is still very much with us. But so too is the climate emergency, and I worry that COVID has erased our memories of the impacts of the climate change on our city, that we're forgetting the flooding that threatened members of families like mine who live on Toronto Island, and the heat waves that led to loss of life for those living in aging buildings without insulation and cooling systems. My message to this committee is that we must, as a city, take on the challenge of COVID recovery and build back better if we're to address the tsunami of disruption that lies ahead as residents of this city face the climate emergency. Lynn Adamson's material provided you with a sense of the frightening potential. I will focus on the challenge that we face in retrofitting our existing housing stock because approximately 55% of our greenhouse gas emissions in this city are attributable to heating and cooling a building. Yet our pace of retrofitting is abysmal. Using the most recent information available, city loan programs appear to have led to the completion of only 187 single-family home retrofits and 2,200 multi-residential building unit retrofits over the past 5 years. That's a mere 0.05% of all single-family homes in Toronto and only 0.3% of Toronto's apartment units. Clearly, this level of activity will not allow us to meet our commitment to achieve zero carbon by 2050. So I ask you to make the following recommendations to Council. First, staff up our Transform TO team. COVID temporarily gutted the team, stalling any action on updates, and the result is we don't have an action plan to recover the ground we lost. Second, recommend an increase in funding for Transform TO of $2.5 million. That is, reverse the cuts and authorize the accelerated recruiting to allow the team to move quickly to prepare the plans. Third, recommend that Council set an aggressive timeline for Transform TO to prepare detailed plans for retrofit initiatives with the greatest greenhouse gas reduction potential, and that appears to be multi-unit residential buildings, and request that the plans include a portfolio of tools including both carrots and sticks, a communication strategy that makes the imperative of transition unmistakable by establishing and communicating clear timelines, and importantly, the penalties for failure to transition by stated dates, and a reporting framework that will support continuous monitoring and adjustment of the plans, and that includes annual reports on progress. Retrofit investment pays back in many ways. It offers greenhouse gas reductions, but it also generates significant economic benefits, and therefore it's a good investment on multiple levels. Finally, I want to turn to the matter of revenue generation. While I believe that senior levels of government need to make substantial contributions to address the financial challenge that the city faces in recovering from the impacts of COVID, so too do the homeowners and residents of Toronto. I urge Council to be brave and to build back better by increasing parking levies, a move that will increase revenue and should be communicated as part of our climate action, by raising residential property tax by an additional 1% above the current proposed 0.7% and building fund, and use that revenue, which has been estimated to be about $30 million, to generate a dedicated climate fund that would provide the basis for implementing the approved Transform TO plan now and in future years. Given that we have in place programs to offer relief to those with restricted financial means, property tax is one of the few progressive revenue options available to the city. And resume issuing green bonds with funding for retrofits in the list of eligible investments. Councillors, I thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning, and I urge you to support these amendments to the budget. We are the largest city in Canada, and we can and should lead the way in addressing the climate emergency by building back better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm going to go back to Brandon Haynes. I believe he is now connected. Brandon, are you there? Brandon Haynes. Appears we may still be having some technical difficulties. We'll try Brandon again. Next is James Snetzinger. James, are you there? James Snetzinger. Again, James, if you are there and we can't hear you, you may have to log out and log back in again and work with our clerks. Who's this, James?
Yes, this is James.
James. Okay.
Oh,
there we go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm a retired teacher with the TDSB, and I've been working as a supply teacher for the past since the pandemic, and it's really strange doing virtual. So thank goodness I've got a little bit of background with being able. Sorry, I need to focus on what I'm talking about here. My name is James Snetzinger. and I have a major concern for the future world that these children will inhabit. Some of you may remember when I brought my grade 3 class to City Hall during the discussion of Transform TO for a deputation. My entire class and their parents performed a poem called Think of Me. Shelley, I see you smiling. Earlier, a group of children came down with their parents for a Valentine's Day action for climate funding. I'm so happy that Transform TO was funded, but now our climate action is slowed down due to the COVID emergency. There have been delays in new hiring, and current staff was cut back by 1/3 for much of the year because of COVID. We can't afford for this to happen. We need to invest in the future. We need to catch up and, well, I'm hearing a lot of people say, build back better. We need to do more. We need to do it all. Black Lives Matter, everything matters. And I don't mean to undermine any of these things, but I would like to emphasize the importance of investing in nature-based solutions, because in nature, we are all related. We're all family. I spent many hours exploring the ravines with my students, both as a classroom teacher, as an outdoor educator for Thorncliffe Park Public School with children ages in grades 2, 3, and 4. Many of these children had never experienced that part of the city, even though they live right next to it. These children pulled up garbage, pulled out plants that don't belong there, like dog strangling vine, and they developed a connection, a relationship with the environment. And we did this even before Don't Mess with the Dawn came in with their thousands of people, which is fabulous. Then my outdoor ed program got canceled, and I and some of my students served as volunteers for ravine cleanup. And you know what? If my outdoor ed program was still running, I wouldn't be retired. It distresses me to know that the ravine strategy has not been funded. This is an example of where the city has the vision and knows what needs to be done, but then just doesn't put the money where it needs to go. My professional experience as a teacher tells me that there is a need for programs like the one that I ran at Thorncliffe. It wouldn't even be expensive. People used to assume that it was canceled because it was too costly, but it really wasn't. It was only my teacher's salary, and I would do it for half of that because it's important for the children and important for the future of the biosphere. Green infrastructure is key to a healthy city in the future. It's key in our work in fighting climate change and growing a population that understands the deep imperative value of our relationship with the biosphere. It's our second skin. It's our home that keeps us alive. When it's explained properly to children, they can understand that the green roof bylaw should be expanded for a greater impact by increasing subsidies for developers. The rate of subsidy would go up relative to the costs which have gone up. More green roofs means better stormwater filtration, pollinator habitat, and even carbon sequestration. So I know I'm running out of time and I've got a lot more to say, but green spaces should be studied for ways to increase healthy microbial life in soil. The fact is that 1% increase in organic matter draws down 10 more tons per acre of safely sequestered carbon. Walking children from the school to the valley every day, trees are important. So what I'm asking council to do is to increase property tax revenue this year by 1%. And I think that's a modest ask. So let's not delay. Set up a dedicated climate fund and increase revenues, put additional staffing back to Transform TO, and I'll help.
Thank you very much. Next will be, any questions, by the way, sorry. For James? Okay, next three are Laura Phillips, Amy O'Neill, and Carissa Wong. So Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great, you have 5 minutes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Laura. I grew up in Etobicoke North in Ward 2, and now I live in Ward 10. I love Toronto. I make theater in this city, and about the over-policing of citizens during the G20 summit. I'm here to talk about defunding the police. I'm disappointed that the 2021 draft budget demonstrates a commitment to the status quo when what we need is bold action today to mitigate the devastating effects of COVID-19. If you approve the Toronto Police Services budget sustained at the 2020 level, you're recommitting to protecting property over people, surveilling vulnerable residents, and truly failing the communities that make this city worth living in. I call on you to defund Toronto Police Services in 2021 by 50% and reallocate those $500 million to meet community needs, and strengthen public services for marginalized communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, racialized and poor people. In winter 2020, I worked at Union Station, which became a de facto respite center for people. I saw the cross-section of pandemics the city is experiencing: homelessness, opioid poisoning, and lack of mental health support. Every time I go through my phone calling non-police numbers for mental health assistance, I get the same responses. There are no beds available, there are no walk-in services due to COVID, shelters are full, mobile teams are not being deployed, and ultimately, I get referred to call 911, which will incite a police response. Policing is not the appropriate way to respond to mental health crises. In 2018, Toronto Police reported that mental health crises made up 3% of police calls, but those calls account for 11% of the use of force. That's more than 2 times the use of force rate for calls involving robberies, and more than 3 times the use of force rate for calls involving apprehending people wanted on charges. I cannot in good conscience call the police for a mental health public safety concern when police presence itself is a public safety concern. TPS's mobile crisis intervention units include a police officer with a nurse, and the police officer goes in first, despite evidence that the presence of a uniformed police officer has a high chance of escalating and causing additional stress to people in crisis. 911 as a police-run dispatch for all emergency service deployment is harmful to Torontonians and severely underservices people like me who work in public space and have no clear path to engage non-police intervention. The Toronto Budget Committee must take $500 million out of the Toronto Police budget and use it to provide long-term investment in non-police strategies for community safety. Instead of consulting with civilian-led organizations, why not invest in them with public money that we take from the police budget? We don't need trial periods or comprehensive reports to prove that policing in Toronto criminalizes poverty, violently targets Black communities, and is driven by gentrification and developers' interests. Finally, let me remind you that defunding the police is not a labor rights issue. The Toronto Police Association is a nonprofit organization, not a union, and is not part of the Canadian Labour Congress. The Canadian Labour Congress has declared support for defunding the police to divert funding to communities. Police do not represent or protect the interests or rights of the working class. In Toronto, police show up at unionized workers' lawful strikes to protect business interests, not out of labor solidarity. And if you really were worried about jobs, why does Toronto Employment and Social Services receive less than 10% of our tax dollars? Imagine how many more jobs you can create by investing in community-based supports and services. Defunding the Toronto Police Services by 50% in 2021 would free up $500 million to build back better with an equity lens. $500 million to fund harm reduction services in every single shelter and respite center so that no person has to choose between their sobriety and a roof over their head. $500 million to invest in non-police mental health services that can respond to crises with empathy, transformative justice, medical attention, and ongoing community support for individuals. Maintaining the police budget at 2020 levels signals that the police are untouchable, unaccountable, and are the single most important thing to the recovery of Toronto. Is that the city you envision? Because it's not the Toronto I know. Thank you.
We do have a question from Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your deputation this morning. I want to go back to something you said really early in the comments. You talked about what is the status quo right now, which is that, you know, when we have a mental crisis or emotionally disturbed person's crisis, to use police parlance, whatever is that crisis, an officer has to go in first and then back it up with our sort of more medical approach. The mental crisis team has to come after. We could change that right now, no charge. And what's standing in the way is some of the impediments that you went on to mention. When we deal with this reform, I'm going to be honest, because many deputants have talked about cut it by half right now, and I'm going to be honest and say that's not something I could vote for right now. My community would, if I said cut in half the budget for a line on the budget that has 7,000 employees, that would be chaos, and it would be very hard to justify to the whole population of Toronto. However, we could make a big change right now, and some of the culture changes that you mentioned in your deputation, if we were simply to take 911 and make that a city service instead of a police-run service, and that's something we could discuss right now. Is that something that is on the radar for the parts of the community that you're working with? Is that something you'd like to see us discuss right now?
I think the detail of who operates 911 is less of in our discussions than a completely separate number or line. I understand that 911 serves an important purpose, especially for fire and paramedic, but I think something totally separate where it's not going to come on the radar of the police. It won't matter that person's status. It won't matter that person's record, and to actually separate it rather than change a nuance or detail.
Right, and that's part of what's being proposed on Wednesday, making a better use of 211 by providing that alternative line. I ask because we're mulling that over right now, because what we've learned, everyone's talked about cahoots, but what we learned is part of the way through the history of cahoots, they added it back to 911, made 911 a citizen response, and cahoots can respond to calls that come through on 911 instead of police. And that's when they really started to get success in that program. So I just wondered if that was being discussed in the community that you're working with.
The discussion is more about if the pilot project is being set up to succeed on a long-term basis. As an artist, I know a lot about project versus operational funding, and something can fail if it doesn't have legs.
Right. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your deputation. We're going to again try to jump back to Brandon Haynes. As I understand, he's connected by telephone now. So Brandon, welcome.
Budget Chair.
There we go.
Morning.
Three times the charm. Go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much to the clerk staff for assisting me with the tech issues that I've experienced this morning. And good morning to all the councillors and to Mayor Tory. I am the president of the Toronto Public Library Workers Union, Local 4948, and I represent over 2,000 library workers at the City of Toronto. And I just want to begin by saying that I'm extremely proud of the work that we've done as library workers since the onset of this pandemic, in terms of traditional library services that have been provided, as well as the additional work that we've done in response to this crisis that we're all grappling with. We provided over 60,000 online programs. We've been able to provide access to over 40,000 people in terms of food bank access through the libraries. And we've connected with seniors, I think over 10,000 seniors, and checking in with them and making sure that they're doing well. So it's been very humbling to see that the support from the community is there in terms of being a lifeline to the public. With all that being said, I will say that I'm very shocked and quite disappointed actually to see that city staff have not recommended funding two very crucial initiatives in terms of the budget for 2021, and that is related to the Digital Literacy for Seniors program, as well as community librarian outreach programs. And Mayor Tory and others at City Hall have billed the 2021 budget as an equity budget, and I find this to be anything but equitable. The image that comes to my mind is one of a grandmother trying to connect to her grandchildren on Zoom or some other platform and not having the much needed help from a library worker to assist her with that accessing of that technology. So there's lots of talk at the city in terms of building back stronger, And I would suggest that there's no better place to begin that work than investing in our public library. So the pandemic has put a big spotlight, I think, on the inequities that exist in our society and the need for investing in our public library. And unfortunately, although we are the busiest library system in the world, with over 19 million visits per year in person, the budget over the years has not kept up with that need for demand. And some might say that we've been defunded in terms of the budget and what is provided to us. So I think that if we come out of this pandemic, it's going to be very clear that the need for investing in the services at Toronto is going to be very high. In 2008, it was one of our busiest years, and that was at the time of the recent recession at the city. And there was a huge amount of need for library services at that time because of the economic despair that the city of Toronto was experiencing. And I would say that coming out of the pandemic, this is going to be even more of a challenge in terms of keeping up with the demand for services in the community. So many of you are aware that there was a report done by the Martin Prosperity Institute several years ago, which is an extension of the Rotman School of Management at U of T. And it demonstrated that for every dollar that is invested in the Toronto Public Library, there's about $6 of return on investment. So what that amounts to is about $26 million that comes from programs that the library provides. In terms of database searches, there's about $43 million of return in that aspect. $18 million generated from the workstation usage and computer usage at the libraries. $7.4 million in terms of free Wi-Fi. 7 million technology sessions that provides about $26 million of benefit, and the list goes on. And if you think of the operating budget of the library, which is roughly $200 million, the library generates about $1 billion with a B return on investment in terms of the benefit to the society. So I just speak to you today, urging Budget Committee members to support the investment of our public library. We have experienced tremendous economic challenges over the years. We are a largely part-time workforce, with over 50% of our members being part-time, and I believe that is the highest of all the City of Toronto divisions. 70% of our members are female or women. 50%, as I said, are part-time. Many do not have access to benefits or pensions or all of those benefits that you would experience. And we've done tremendously well, I would say. I think maybe too well in terms of fiscal management of the budget over the years. And it's time for city councilors and the mayor to actually demonstrate leadership and advocate for our public library. It's the busiest in the world. And I believe that it is time that we put money back into the budget to make sure that the library is available for years to come. So I thank you for your time this morning, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Questions? Seeing none, appreciate your time with us today. We'll jump back down to Amy O'Neill from Treetop Children's Center. Amy, are you with us?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Amy. Go ahead.
Great. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Amy O'Neill, and I'm the director of Treetop Children's Center in Ward 12, a community-based licensed nonprofit childcare center serving children 2.5 to 12 years old. Now, prior to COVID, we had over 155 children enrolled. We closed again on December 24th due to the province-wide school closures, and we closed with only 35 children enrolled. This speaks volumes about the childcare crisis Toronto is currently facing. And this is not just a Treetop challenge, this is a challenge for the entire sector. Now, this budget reflects a 7.7% cut to childcare, and for the childcare community, any dollar lost from our budget is deeply felt and tends to be exceptionally difficult to recover. Our childcare center and the community we work with are highly concerned and disappointed about this potential 7% cut to childcare. We have supported the children and our families in our community throughout the pandemic. We have prioritized their health and well-being above all things, and we know the value that quality early learning and childcare programs provide in strengthening our community and supporting the Torontonian children and families who depend on our care. This is why I'm very disappointed that the city would even consider even a small cut during this pandemic. We are in a crisis, and without help from the city and help from the province, we face massive closures. We can't build a better Toronto without childcare. To date, 27 childcare centres in Toronto have permanently closed since the initial mandated closures in 2020. And now, without revenue from our school-age programs that are currently closed and financial support from the government, permanent closures will continue. 40 remain closed without a reopening date, and more than 130 centres across Ontario have closed. Without ongoing stabilization funding, more centres will continue to close. This market-based system cannot sustain itself in the current climate of low enrollment and financial instability. The feds have promised a pan-Canadian publicly funded childcare system, but in order to achieve that, we need all levels of government, including the city, to be collaborating. I would also like to speak to what our centre has experienced after the province's announcement to extend school-age childcare program closures. We're very concerned about our viability. The ramifications of mandating the closure of school-age programs has rippling effects on childcare centres being able to operate. Without stabilization funding, our centres are in jeopardy of closing permanently. This budget doesn't account for this current and ongoing mandated closure of kindergarten and school-age programs. I can only speak from a nonprofit perspective, but the fees that are generally collected from our school-age and kindergarten programs offset the costs of operating our other programs like infant, toddler, and preschool programs. The province has made it clear that fees cannot be collected during the mandated closures, but without that revenue or some sort of immediate stabilization from the city, childcare centres are struggling to keep their doors open, and we are one of them. As a nonprofit childcare program, our priority is providing the best possible care and learning experience for Toronto's youngest and most vulnerable citizens. We focus on being leaders who are actively involved in our community and in supporting the needs of the families that we work with. I'd like to thank you for continuing to champion quality, accessible, and affordable childcare in Toronto. But I ask you, as our decision makers, that you make the right decision and do not even cut $1 to the Children's Services budget. Thank you, and I welcome any questions that you have.
We do have a question from Councillor Carroll.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for that. That's the most vivid picture that has been painted for us since this budget deliberation began. As you can appreciate, because you do a budget for your own operations, we're considering a budget, and it's very unusual to make big changes to a budget. Once it's been launched, the property tax increase gets announced, and you can't really make changes. But there's never been a time before where it was so obvious the challenge of asking staff to write a budget in August of the previous year. Start their draft there. And this year they worked on it a little longer. They were still, finalizing their budgets in October and trying to be responsive. But even then, they didn't know the situation you would be in now. So to make real the problem in the childcare budget, can you imagine for us, say school is closed for the rest of this month, say we open February 10th. I'm wondering if you can tell us what your challenges will be if you have to open the center, but again, people are being asked to work at home if at all possible, which is often the full fee paying parents that can work at home. So if there are only 35 children in the center and the province says open next Monday, how are you going to do it?
The bottom line, Councillor Carroll, is we won't. And those much needed childcare spaces in the city of Toronto will disappear overnight. And then is Toronto a livable city without childcare? No. People need childcare to work and go to school and better themselves. It's an economic, it provides economic stability for the city. And without funding, we will close. And there will be less childcare spaces for families to choose from, and the city will suffer, and the children will suffer.
So, well, we don't usually make changes. This is the 1 year where we're looking at a budget that didn't anticipate that you had to stay closed in January, possibly all of February, and that the work from home, if at all possible, would continue. And generally speaking, am I right in thinking that generally those that can work from home tend to be the full fee paying parents, and that's
Yes.
part of the funding tension?
Yes, that's correct.
They stay home and they don't pay, and all you have are subsidized clients. Both you and the city have a problem.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for painting that picture for us. I think it's much more clear to anyone who is listening today. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Next is Carissa Wong. Carissa, are you there? Carissa, are you connected?
Hello, Chair. This is Nahom with the City Clerk's Office. Carissa Wong is currently connected to the WebEx meeting, but has not connected their audio in order to speak.
Okay, so Carissa, if you can't speak, can you maybe just either unmute yourself, or you may have to reconnect again. If you could just work with Clerk, we'll try to get you. Oh, say you, Carissa?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry about the confusion.
No worries.
Good morning, City Councilors, Budget Chair, Mayor Tory. I'm a third-generation Torontonian resident of Ward 14. My name is Carissa Wong, and I'm loosely affiliated with the Climate Fast group. It's a volunteer group that strives to build political will and act on the climate fast. I'm also the mother of a 1-year-old, and I would like to have another child so that she can have a sibling, but I'm torn because of the footprint that people are having on the climate, and ethically, 1 child is the best to keep the global population down. I grew up in Toronto and had many wonderful experiences with nature, both in Toronto and the surrounding areas. My grandparents owned a cottage in Georgian Bay, and my family shared many happy times in Wasaga Beach. And later we bought a cottage in the Muskoka area, and this quickly became my favorite place in the world, where I felt most at home, peaceful, and connected. I was also fortunate to have the opportunity to go diving in coral reefs when I was in university, and these experiences were something that I'll treasure for my life. But coral reefs may be gone by the mid-century. And also, as we know, the climate's changing our world, and there has been the melt rate of the world's sea ice is now 57% faster than in the 1990s, which is only 3 decades ago. So Toronto is the fastest growing city in North America, and I believe that with COVID-19, we have the opportunity to build back better. A stitch in time saves 9. And investing in climate mitigation adaptation is fiscally responsible. So I am asking City Council to be brave and to keep the energy, the Environment Energy Division budget as was planned for 2021, and not cutting it by 33%, to keep $6 million in to ensure that the city delivers on its climate emergency commitments. I'm asking council to stop spending billions on endlessly rebuilding and repatching the Gardiner, and shift the money to transit and active transportation infrastructure that can advance equity, health, and climate resilience. And I'm asking council to apply a robust budget, a robust climate, health, and equity lens to all major spending decisions so we can build back better. And I'm speaking in solidarity with all the people who've spoken before me on the climate to council today. Thank you for your time.
Very much, Carissa. Any questions? Seeing none. Next, we'll go on to the next three are Lee Adamson, Nita Goswami, and R. Yulina Vithyatharan. Lee, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Great. You're up.
All right. My name is Lee Adamson. I live on St. Clair West, between Davenport and St. Paul's. I've lived in this house for more than 30 years, where my daughter was born and raised. I was a research scientist at Mount Sinai Hospital. I worked with my clinical colleagues to give babies a healthier start on life, to set them up for a better future. But over the years, I became increasingly alarmed by what I was seeing in the news. It was and is like a slow-moving horror movie, increasingly frequent and more severe droughts, floods, fires, ice storms, hurricanes, species loss, it goes on. I was working to give babies a healthier start, but they would grow into an increasingly dismal future. As soon as I could, I took early retirement to tackle climate change, to work on turning things around. Climate scientists have given us 10 years, this decade, to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, and the sooner the better. It is our last chance to avoid catastrophic changes to the climate and a dire future for ourselves and our children. Like a deer in the headlights, we stare, seemingly transfixed, into that scary reality. And we watch our elected representatives take timid steps, and we despair. I've been working with grassroots neighborhood groups to help people get together and talk about the climate crisis and use local action to combat this despair. It is reassuring to find that I am not alone, that many people are well aware of the climate crisis and are as worried about the future as I am. And they are taking every step they personally can to reduce their carbon emissions and stop climate change, just as I do. Indeed, a city poll in 2018 showed that over 90% of those surveyed agreed that climate change threatened personal health and agreed that everyone needs to reduce their emissions, themselves included. So people know about the crisis and know we need to take action. So I'm here to ask for bold action on climate in the budget, something of a scale that acknowledges the emergency we are in. First, I would like to see an ambitious green bonds fund that people like me can invest in. Sustainable investing in ETFs and renewable energy is taking off big time. People want to invest in a better future, and I think Toronto should get a piece of that action with green bonds. Provide the capital we need to save money. A sure investment in energy conservation, for example, or district energy systems. Second, I would like to see a 1% levy on the property tax bill, a climate action levy, a dedicated fund to support and accelerate climate action projects at the neighborhood level, so people can see the levy in action in their community, on their street, in their homes. Also use it to support the ideas and energy and talent of students and faculty at Toronto's universities and colleges, entrepreneurs at incubators like CSI, and others. We can do this. We can make positive change, but it will take effort and funding to turn things around. Creating change creates jobs, good jobs, while we build back better. Now, people don't like paying more taxes It is true. But people do like shopping for things they want, for things they value, that offer rewards, that will make a better future. So I want you to have faith and be bold and take strong steps in the budget to tackle climate change. Turn our despair into action and hope. I would like to thank you and City Council for declaring a climate emergency, for creating Transform TO, a world-class climate action plan, and for beginning to fund the transition we need. But we need more. We are entering the last decade that can turn things around. It is not the moment to look away, no matter how much we may like to. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate your comments. You have a question from Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Budget Chief. And Lee, thank you for your presentation. I agree with you wholeheartedly that the investment that the cities makes needs to be reflective of the crisis that we're in. And notwithstanding some of the other requests you made about raising revenue, I would point you to one piece of your deputation had me thinking about something we've been doing for a couple of years now at the city, and that's issuing the issuance of green bonds. And most recently in 2019, we did issue a green bond, an additional green bond of 130 million. That brings the total up to 330 million, which is like, and giving credit where it's due, this is a good news story that that we have been issuing green bonds the last couple of years. The problem why you don't see it in, or your bank doesn't offer it, is because debt of this magnitude gets, and you're quite right that green bonds are very attractive right now. It gets taken by major institutional investors before it reaches you and I to be able to invest. Unfortunately, maybe that changes with time as banks offer different products to us. But we are doing our best in this one regard of your presentation. The rest I'll work on at Budget Committee for you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Nita Goswami. Now, Nita, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Bit of feedback. As I understand, you are also deputing on behalf of Chatel Patel.
Oh, thank you.
Who was not able to make it yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are up to depute. Speak to us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Nita Goswami, and I speak to you today as a community engagement worker for the Scarborough Civic Action Network, better known as SCAN, which is a nonpartisan network that aims to address inequities across Scarborough through civic engagement. Through widespread engagement with communities across Scarborough, we know that affordable housing for low to moderate income tenants in market rental housing is a pressing issue facing Scarborough communities. Today, I would like to share with you some of the stories we have heard from Scarborough residents to give you more detailed understanding of lived realities of communities here, in hopes that the City Council will prioritize supports and resources for low to moderate income tenants in market rental housing as it decides its budget for 2021. We have heard about college and university students in our buildings paying double the rent of other tenants and also having to pay extra for hydro expenses. Apartments are often cold during winter. One student shared he had to buy a new heater to cope, which was an additional expense. We have also heard that oftentimes apartment renovations are done only to make the building aesthetically appealing on the outside, but the actual living spaces inside apartments are not repaired. In some cases, people resort to buying supplies on their own and try to fix the problem themselves or paint their apartment. We have also heard about tenants having to live with moldy washrooms and bedroom walls. In some cases, tenants have developed allergies due to mold and have ended up missing work due to illness. Without proper ventilation, washrooms become moldy and apartments are not safe to live in. We have also heard that many apartments have really old stoves, and in some cases, two of the former burners are not working. Some buildings don't have proper elevators and people get stuck inside. Tenants are subjected to frequent water shutoffs without prior notice. Window sills are old. The glass is just a single layer, so apartments are often very cold. This and other conditions create enormous stress for families where people are often working 2-3 jobs and have kids or are students who have to work and study. With this added stress, we have to compromise our mental health. I also know about these experiences because I'm a tenant and well acquainted with these issues. Tenants are reluctant and afraid to call for maintenance work that needs to be done because they are asked to pay additional charges for their work, which just leaves tenants living in hazardous conditions. Tenants often resign themselves to living in such intolerable conditions. We feel helpless, and it seems there is nothing we can do. Another issue we have heard about is tenants being given eviction notices for unsubstantiated claims or situations that do not warrant such an extreme response. One tenant who has 3 kids was given an N5 notice, which demanded that she pay almost $1,000 because management accused her children of damaging an elevator. This claim was made without sufficient evidence. She was told that if she didn't pay the fine, she faced eviction. Living on one minimum wage income made it impossible for her family to pay the fine. She was advised by SCAN to access support from legal aid clinic. However, without this advice, she would not have known how to deal with this situation. And without the financial means to pay the fine, she was facing eviction. We call on the city to support programs and initiatives that will help to protect the supply of affordable housing and protect tenants. Programs like Rent FTO are critical to ensure that apartment buildings owners comply with maintenance standards. This will help tenants feel safe in their homes and also help them feel less reluctant to raise concerns about issues like mold and other issues. We also need programs that help protect tenants, like the Tenant Defense Fund. Most tenants need support. Many are afraid of challenging landlords owing to worries of reprisal and potential eviction. And the city needs to commit to increasing the supply of affordable housing that is truly affordable. Housing should not be more than 30% of a person's income. As we all know, safe and secure, decent housing is essential for everyone. It's a basic need that everyone has a right to. This needs to be kept at the forefront as the budget for 2021 is decided for the City of Toronto. It needs to be a budget that supports everyone and ensures that the most vulnerable and protected and can live in dignity and security. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Anita. I think we have a Councillor Bradford. Did you have a question? No, okay, sorry. Thank you very much for your deputation. Next is Arulina Vithiatharan. Arulina, are you there?
Hello, Chair. This is Nahum with the City Clerk's Office. They are currently connected to the meeting, but have not connected their audio in order to speak.
Thank you very much. Arulina, if you can hear me, if you could maybe either connect or you may have to disconnect and connect back on. You may have to work with the clerks on that. So I'll just give you, if you can disconnect if you do hear me, or can you connect? Sorry. Okay, so we'll go to the next speaker. And again, Arulina, if you're listening, please be patient and we'll try to get you on. Next is Andrea Hatala. Oh, wait a minute. Who's on?
Okay.
Who's this, please?
Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
We can hear you. I'm just, who is this? What's your name?
Oh, I'm Andrea. It's Andrea.
Andrea, great.
Yes.
Glad you're here with us. You will have 5 minutes. We can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Just let me, hi, members of council. and thank you for the opportunity to depute today. I'm here to ask you to not cut the poverty reduction strategy. I am a recipient of ODSP, and there have been many months that my money runs out before the month's end. And I realize that social assistance rates are a provincial issue. However, I use many of the meal programs and the food banks that are in part funded by the city. And these meal programs not only give me a meal, I also get someone to help with problems that may come up. And there's company so that I don't feel isolated. And they have like programs to keep me busy. So, but all of these initiatives need to be funded. So I'm asking, and even though COVID has changed so many of our lives and has taken resources that you know need has taken like valuable resources from other things. These programs and agencies have given us computers so that everyone can participate in meetings on Zoom and things like that. And they still provide takeout meals and socially distanced food bank access so that the whole city does not, you know, so that everybody in the city can get the food that they need. And the world will return to normal eventually, but we still don't want, you know, people to fall apart. So I'm asking you to maintain the investment in these programs. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Any questions? Okay, the next three speakers will be Ria Perot, Linda Bui, and Shakalo Sharapova. Ria, are you connected?
Ria. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Ria, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Excellent. You have 5 minutes and start whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Ria Perot. I'm making a deputation today to emphasize the importance of prioritizing climate in the 2021 budget. I'm 24 years old. I was born and raised in Toronto in Ward 11, and I still live here today. This is my first deputation. At 24, I feel an incredible sense of responsibility to advocate for stronger climate policy by working through as many avenues of change as I know how. I'm privileged enough to have the time and capacity to give a deputation today, and old enough to do things like vote, the opportunity for which I have never missed. But despite this privilege, I feel that I have very little power over my future, but you do. I know that I am among many, many young people who feel this way, and they are not giving deputations today, but the impacts of climate change in this city and country will be dire for us and your children and our children unless you act to treat the ecological crisis like the existential issue that it is, and lead the way for other levels of government to follow. Canada is influenced by what happens in Toronto. Now is the time to make climate a priority while we're building back from the impacts of COVID and so many other systemic issues that have come to light recently. But you can't simply say that you're building back better unless you're investing in the areas that will actually create a better future. The current budget isn't right, and it isn't enough. For example, there's a shortage of $2.5 million towards what was planned for climate emergency commitments, but money continues to be funneled into the crumbling Gardner. This is not building back better, and it is not demonstrating the leadership and commitments that the rest of Canada and the world need to see. It's really unfortunate that climate change does not operate on the same timescale as election cycles, but the resources that we put into mitigating the crisis today are a mere fraction of what we will need to pay in the future. So here's what needs to change. There is no need for the planned $2.5 million cut to the energy and environment budget. At least 10 people this morning alone have identified another area for budget cuts, namely the police, which I and countless other youth across the city would strongly support. Stop funding the repair of the Gardner and prioritize active transportation instead, which will advance your stated goals of equity, health, and resilience instead of undermining them. Apply a climate and health and equity lens to all major spending decisions as you focus and move resources where they are needed most, in particular to community-led alternatives to policing. And stop prioritizing low property taxes for homeowners and increase the residential property tax while continuing to provide targeted relief to those struggling. You said it yourselves. As we work towards recovery, our decisions need to address systemic challenges and ensure we create opportunity, prosperity, and a better Toronto for all. COVID-19 has really been a wake-up call for these systemic threats. The climate emergency has been systemically perpetuated for decades before I was born, before you were born. And to address it in a manner that will actually pay off, we have merely years. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you'll take my perspective and the perspective of my generation and future generations into account when you're making your revisions. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. And Ria, thank you. And I think there are several of us on this committee and at council that do appreciate the crisis that's ahead of us with regards to climate change. And as well, we have voiced our disappointment that we seem to be falling further and further behind with our new target. There was one thing that you said, and it was right at the end, and we've heard a couple of people say this, and I think it deserves at least acknowledging, because it perpetuates a myth that only homeowners pay taxes, because we encounter that all the time. That people say, but people use it in the reverse. They are saying, well, you don't pay taxes because you just rent. But the reality is, everyone that lives in the city of Toronto pays property taxes. They just might not see it. And so, while I share your concern that I think the tax rate is too low, I have year over year for. I think I've been here 10 years now, and I have voted for higher than inflationary increases. And in all 12 of those years, some of them quite a bit higher, in all 10 of those years, I think that it does a disservice when we say it's only homeowners. There is a tax policy at the city that actually limits the increase to multi-unit residential, which isn't important because many of those people are making lower income or have a lower income. And they have disproportionately, in fact, paid more of a burden on property taxes because their mill rate, the multiplier, has been quite a bit higher. So I would just caution with using that it's only taxpayers that property taxpayers that are benefiting. I see Gary's fingers on the button and cut me off because I agree with everything that you're saying, Ria, except I'm worried that it'll come back and bite us when people don't think that renters as well pay that property tax.
Thank you, Council. I was actually just trying to figure out what the question was in that, but that's okay. Don't you know? Sorry, don't you know?
Don't you know?
There we are. Okay. As I understand, Arlena with Tharan is now connected. Arlena, are you there?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Arulini Vidyadharan, and I have been a resident of Scarborough more than past 17 years. Until last year, my family and I lived as tenant of a market renting building in the neighborhood of Woburn in Scarborough. I understand the frustration that low to moderate income family households face and the need for affordable and well-maintained and managed market rental housing. I would like to use this opportunity to share my experiences. As long-time tenants, my family was fortunate that rent control policies kept our family expenses affordable. Despite job losses and precarious employment, we were able to manage many years with one income while I stayed home and cared for our children. Our oldest child graduated last year from university, our second child graduating in April, and my youngest in grade 11. With the additional income from my oldest children and saving after 13 years in the same apartment, we were finally able to buy our first home in Canada in the fall of 2019. I can't emphasize enough how important rent control was to our family, especially during the time we experienced layoffs and personal illnesses. When we left our apartment, our rent was $1,500 a month for the 3-bedroom. New tenants moving in were charged $2,200 per month. I can't imagine how we would have managed if we were starting off like many new immigrants and families living in Scarborough. The first few years living in building was very positive. It was well managed and well maintained. The building staff were very responsive and courteous whenever tenant asked for repairs to be done or had any concerns. I felt that our building, though it had no luxury amenities, was as clean and well kept as condos in Scarborough. It felt like a home where owners took pride. Unfortunately, 6 years ago, building management changed. Communication was not good and management official hours were cut to half days, closing at 1 p.m. There were many complaints from tenants of long delays for repairs, fee charges, rental increases, inaccessible management, and broken elevators. One friend left the building saying that a large temporary patch placed on a bathroom wall 8 years before to fix a leak, hot and had not been painted, and a stove top element not fixed even for 3 years. Despite numerous requests, there were also incidents of management entering apartment without prior notice and issuing eviction notices for the slightest infractions. Many of us felt that management was deliberately being rude to long-standing tenants to get us out so they can increase the rent. However, many of us were also helpless as housing market continued to rise and affordable housing option remained limited in Scarborough. Rent control, rent supports, affordable subsidizing housing, and tenant legal support services are needed more than ever during these difficult times for my community. I therefore urge you in this year's city's budget to keep and increase the rent supports currently available to tenants of low to moderate income in market housing, especially in many of the marginalized neighborhoods in Scarborough. As a long-term solution, we need to build more rental purpose buildings to cool down the high demand. Affordable, well-maintained and managed rental living spaces build healthy, stressless, peaceful, happy community. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Erlina. Any other questions? Any questions at all? Okay, next we'll go back on the list. Linda Bui. Linda Bui or Bui? Linda, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yes.
Good, we can hear you.
Good, good. Okay, perfect.
Go ahead. Can you hear Linda? Sorry. Linda, just checking to see if you are there.
Yep. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect.
Linda, Linda, I'm just Linda.
Want to acknowledge the line we're on and our collective responsibility as members to honor the training. I extend gratitude to Indigenous community members who have always been and continue to be stewards of this land. Like many speakers have articulated before me, I believe this status quo budget does not go far enough to tackle the multiple crises we're facing: the climate crisis, health crisis, and racial injustice crisis that has disproportionately impacted women, especially young racialized women like myself. Our mental health is deteriorating as we face pressures of not only taking care of ourselves, but also our family and community. Many of us have endured very public and private incidents of anti-Black and anti-Asian racism in our community. Many of my friends have left the city without the prospect of work or affordable housing. It is women, especially Black, Indigenous, and women with disabilities, who've been on the front lines of the pandemic as organizers of mutual aid campaigns, as caretakers, and as healthcare workers. They fill in the gaps in society that have been made glaringly visible by this pandemic. Yes, we've witnessed it. In fact, women's participation in the workforce overall has fallen to all-time lows in 30 years. And young women's job losses reaching as high as 40% of all losses overall. Not to mention, we're facing the brunt of the climate crisis without adequate access to land, food security, and green spaces. It is deeply concerning that while it is women who are taking on the majority of care work at home, they'll be further burdened as the city looks to reduce support to children's services. It is concerning that recommendations outlined by the city's very own COVID opportunities report with respect to green jobs and youth programs are inadequately addressed in this budget. Finally, it cannot be said enough that it's concerning that while women-led organizations like Black Lives Matter HEAL have called upon the city to defund the police budget with public support, that these calls have not been realized. I urge you to honor women of diverse backgrounds, especially for those who have lost their jobs, loved ones, and their lives during the pandemic. There's a long list of names, but I want to take a moment to acknowledge a few who have been failed. Maureen Ambersley, a registered nurse in long-term care and mother who died after contracting the virus and had spoken out about the concern she had with health and safety at work. And more recently, Stephanie Von Wynn, a young occupational nurse who has died by suicide. Both racialized women, among many others whose lives and stories were cut far too short. My birthday wish this year is simple. Reallocate at least 50% of the police budget to led mental health support, childcare services, affordable housing, climate action, and job opportunities. Put disability, gender, climate, and a health equity lens at the forefront of decisions made. I'm not sure about you, but I definitely don't want to wait another 30 years to make up losses. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm just wondering, too, Linda, if you could also send in your deputation. There were a few challenges with hearing you at the beginning. So I'm just, if you could send it in, we'd also have the opportunity to read it as well.
Okay,
next,
you.
No problem. Next is Shaflo Sharapova.
Hello, do you hear me?
We do hear you, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to depute on our collective needs, community needs. My name is Shaflo Sharipova, and I'm a resident of Torkley Park neighborhood and the leader of the local Champions Network Food Access Group. representing 7 neighborhoods across Toronto. We launched the free meal distribution project here in Thorncliffe in April 16, 2020, to tackle food insecurity made much worse by the global pandemic and economic crisis. Our flyer posted in one small group went so wild that we started getting calls within 1 hour from Mississauga, Etobicoke, and Brampton. Even Toronto social service case workers were calling us for permission to sharing our contact information with their clients. On the distribution day, some were calling us several times to ensure that we are bringing food today so they do not have to worry about it for the rest of the day. We were touched deeply when a senior said that she was crying while opening the food we have cooked for her. We felt hopeful when one of our recipients shared the situation. When he was eating our meal, he received a message from back home saying that his old friend died from suicide because he couldn't afford feeding his family. He said that he's very thankful for living in this country. Yes, we are far in better situation, but you never know. Maybe right now we are saving someone's life too. Following this campaign, members of the Local Champions Network launched another project called Food Access Toronto. The purpose was to identify systemic gaps in food security and try to bring some solutions. The findings from the survey conducted in our neighborhoods came with no surprise. All the issues indicated in the answers were pre-existent long time ago before the pandemic. On top of the systemic issues of poverty and unemployment, we now have shut down many services for food access. Food banks are experiencing unprecedented increase in demand. While many organizations were focused on food distribution, there are many residents who are still unable to access food. According to Toronto Foundation, more than 600,000 Torontonians with significantly reduced income may not be eligible for the government benefits. The face of hunger is also changing. We are seeing now more seniors and people with disabilities, sadly to inform that the younger generation is also among these vulnerable populations. These people who are struggling to feed their families are our own neighbors, members of our community. We are asking the city and other levels of government to work together in 2021 to implement the following food security action items. Number 1, on behalf of the city, make additional monetary allocations for Ontario Works and ODSP beneficiaries, at least during recovery period. Number 2, Toronto could become a city school model for adopting mandatory free breakfast programs in all its schools. By saying breakfast, we mean freshly prepared breakfast, not the snacks. Number 3, invest in community gardening. Create more spaces for community gardens and additional educational tools. Encourage residential buildings to organize more spaces around so their residents can cultivate produce for their own table and even share with their neighbors. Number 4, invest in neighborhood infrastructure. Make community kitchen a necessary attribute in every neighborhood, same as we have public libraries and recreational centers. It's a great asset, not only for preparing food for a mass vulnerable population, but also for education as well, in nutrition and healthy eating, cultivating food traditional and cultural exchange. And number 5, invest in neighborhood planning tables and increase funding for the grassroots organizations. Reactivate our neighborhood tables, staffing resources and friendly policies. These tables bring together community residents and agencies for quick response to a neighborhood needs. We hope that the people of Toronto and all levels of government will take action to ensure that their policies and budget reflect our shared goal in eradicating hunger. Thank you so much.
That's questions. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next. Members, we have 4 more speakers. The next 2 are Dave Mitchell and Michael Longfield. Dave Mitchell from QP Local 79. Are you there? Dave? Again, Dave, if you can hear me, you may be having some challenges with unmuting. If not, we'll have to, I'll go to the next person if I don't hear from you, and then we'll try to get you connected. Okay, next we'll try Michael Longfield from Cycle Toronto. Michael, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, and members of the Budget Committee. And thank you for your time and dedication to listen to so many passionate speakers to better navigate the difficult decisions ahead to help steer our city's finances. My name is Michael Longfield, and I am the Interim Executive Director of Cycle Toronto. I'm here today not just representing our members and supporters, but the 85% of Torontonians who think the city needs to do more to protect vulnerable road users, and the 84% who support building more protected bike lanes. I'm especially encouraged to hear so much support today for equity and climate action. I want to first commend the mayor and each of you on the committee for supporting the city's pandemic response with the Cafe TO and Active TO programs at council last year. These programs have been critical to supporting local businesses, providing access to outdoor space for physical and mental health, and creating more safe environmental transportation options, benefits that transcend the immediate urgency of the pandemic to build back better. They also brought many smiles on the faces of many families and children. In a year when we face so many challenges and difficulties, this is a good news story. Councillors Layton and Bradford and their residents benefited from some of the best new infrastructure along Bloor, University, and Danforth. Along Danforth Avenue, in particular, a complete streets implementation, including patios and protected bike lanes, transformed Danforth and continues to win over skeptics with a vibrant, human-scaled Main Street. Like the King Street pilot, Destination Danforth showed Toronto can be a world leader in rethinking their streets to move people, not cars. Danforth is a model for more neighborhood main streets across Toronto, and we hope to see an Active TO transformation of Yonge Street from Bloor to Lawrence next year, or this year. Post-pandemic, we're getting a glimpse of how transportation habits will change, and already more people are embracing the idea of shopping local in the so-called 15-minute city. Often advocates are tempted to point at what's been done in other cities. Today, we're pointing at what you did here in Toronto. The Office of Recovery and Rebuild's summary specifically highlighted Toronto's own successes in active transportation last year, and not as a one and done, but as a model to keep moving forward. If it took a global crisis for Toronto to take meaningful step forward in building a more equitable transportation network, it shouldn't take another crisis for the next step. Our looming climate crisis means we cannot pause. We urgently need to see solutions to help communities with fewer mobility and transportation options devastated by the pandemic, including the still pending Active TO overlay. Just a few weeks ago, daily COVID cases were about 10 times higher than they were in May when Council first approved Active TO. While there are still many reasons to be optimistic with more vaccines and the effectiveness of physical distancing, it is also very clear the pandemic is not over. We must plan for uncertainty and continue to build resiliency this year. We understand that despite streets seemingly being transformed overnight, these incredible achievements were only possible through epic behind-the-scenes efforts by transportation services, including redeployment of staff throughout the department and long-term infrastructure projects being deferred or accelerated to support the pandemic response. We're encouraged this budget makes important provisions to bring back Cafe TO and the Active TO major road closures. We are concerned it does not address the capacity to replicate accelerated recycling network plan, despite our Vision Zero road safety and Transform TO climate goals, and the Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild recommendations. Senior transportation staff have already told this committee that a repeat of 40 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure is not possible with this proposed budget. We asked the committee to investigate what would be required to make that possible. We assure you the community demand for safe recycling will continue during the pandemic and beyond. We are concerned that while the cycling infrastructure capital budget stays at $16 million for 2021, the plan decreases to only $8 million each year going forward. Millions of dollars in federal infrastructure money to support active transportation could be left on the table without the capacity to implement it. Councillor Carroll, you highlighted the unique challenges for staff this year with planning the budget this past summer and fall. We frankly don't see how this budget isn't a step back from your historic wins last year. With so much progress downtown, we need to build active transportation solutions that also work for Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough. We ask you to continue to work with staff and your colleagues on council to find solutions to meet your constituents' requests to ensure your success last summer becomes the benchmark for our new normal this year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much for the deputation, Michael. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just some questions about some of the feedback that you heard from city staff as they rolled out unprecedented investment and expansion in active transportation this year. What were some of the challenges that you heard about from staff's perspective and from the community's perspective in being able to deliver the 45 kilometers this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, some of what we heard consistently was just staff capacity. I think, we saw this year there was, historic political and popular support to do more. And frankly, the department just wasn't resourced to sort of meet all that demand. And while they achieved incredible things this year, but through redeploying and pushing off some longer term projects, frankly, they're currently not resourced to keep building at that kind of sustainable rate.
So when we don't have the resources in place to advance some of that type of work, and as you identified, there's a balance, some things will move forward, but we end up hitting pause on other things because of the resource constraints. How does that impact the success of these types of programs?
I think a potentially good example of that is, no surprise to anyone, one of the active TO projects that didn't stay was the Brimley project. And, Mr. Chair, we do appreciate your support for the long-term Brimley project and for taking a risk on Brimley this year. But at the same time, road work was being done on a parallel street on Midland Avenue. And if, I think that's sort of a good lesson to sort of look for in the future, that if, we had resource transportation services in the past and given enough capacity, theoretically, we could have built permanent infrastructure along with that road rework on Midland, rather than having to do a temporary project on Brimley that the community ultimately didn't deem successful. And these types of choices are going to keep coming up, especially with the backlog in state of good repair and more roads that could be transformed into, complete streets or make dedicated space for cycling could be done, but without resources to do that, there's going to be this constant scrambling and shifting, for lack of a better word, shifting chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
Got it. Understood. We've done a lot of work and accomplished, a great deal in the downtown core of the old city of Toronto. As you've identified, more work needs to be done as we expand out from the core. What do we need to see in 2021 to make sure that we're able to advance that type of work as we expand out into some of the more suburban areas of Toronto?
I think one of the main pieces is, we know it's going to take time to build support and community support. Certainly Cycle Toronto is hearing support from people in North Etobicoke, people in North York, people in Scarborough that, want to see the types of solutions that were brought downtown or brought to their communities as well. And I think we just know the bottleneck, can't be because of staff capacity. Certainly from Cycle Toronto's perspective, we're not asking staff to sort of work at the same, levels they did last year, but instead asking you as part of the budget committee to adequately resource that department, which in terms of capital budget, I think is earmarked for only 3% of our total capital spending, to ensure that they're able to deliver that when there is political and community demand, that capacity isn't the reason why. I think historically, maybe the cycling unit has been funded at a rate to kind of match where there has been political support, but what we've seen this year, and it just, that shifted and their budget hasn't been adjusted accordingly.
Okay, thanks very much for the deputation, all your work.
Thank you. And any other questions? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Michael. Listen, is there anything we can benchmark the funding for the cycling unit? Like, do you have any thoughts about what would the goal be? At one point in time, we were measuring it about how quickly we could implement the 10-year plan. Could we implement it in 6, 8, 10, or 12 years? We're not even close to doing it, so clearly it wasn't enough. Is there something else we should be benchmarking it to?
I think one of the things definitely would encourage both this committee and for staff to look at is also looking to say find other ways to fund. One of the things that we saw is, Toronto loves comparing itself to Montreal. Montreal's budget will be spending $20 million a year for cycling, and that's not a pandemic budget. That's just their regular back to normal budget, with an additional $6 million in addition to that 20 to do upgrades. Whereas Toronto's entire budget is, capital budget is 16 for cycling, plus what other provisions are made for active TO. But the other piece within that, and I think this is where there's maybe potential for Toronto, is that when road work is redone, the cycling components to that are included as part of that project's budget, not taken from cycling budget. So so in a Toronto equivalent, that would be, imagining that we sort of empower ECS with the resources and the skills and the capacity that when they're doing road work and there is a demand for cycling, that they can implement that within the best practices put forward by the cycling unit and not the cycling unit have to sort of decide, am I going to do a retrofit this year based on community feedback or do this this roadwork project instead? This way we can move forward doing both. And I think it's part of the reasons why a city like Montreal has been able to accelerate so much more transportation than us historically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually have, Michael, I have a few questions for you too. You did make the comment, and I understand the need to increase the cycling infrastructure across the city. But the staff did come to us, and one of the rationales and reasons why they couldn't be as robust, I guess, this year or next year as they were this year, really had to focus on a lot of the proper community consultation. And in fact, I did experience, I do share Brimley Road with one of my colleagues, Councillor Thompson. And one of the challenges we faced was, the real lack of proper, robust community consultation that really didn't occur at the front end. It occurred near the back end, but it didn't occur at the front end. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that rationale of how important it is to be able to have in those, proper consultations with communities.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree that community consultation is very important. And I mean, I think in the case of what we saw rolled out with Active TO, giving staff delegated authority and being able to roll it out much quicker than normal meant that a lot of the feedback was able to be implemented once the bike lanes were on the ground. So it wasn't just like a conventional project where necessarily everything would have to get right in advance, that once things were done, they could be tweaked. In the case of Brimley, for instance, we understand there was a lot of pushback. We also think that if there had been given more opportunities and resources, that further changes, including potentially centerline changes, could have meant that project may have been more successful if there had been more time to do it. And I think the other piece as well, that if we don't start addressing the capacity issues to be able to do that kind of community consultation this year, that we're going to be in the same problem next year and the year after that and the year after that. So really sort of suggesting that even if we're not able to necessarily completely replicate what happened this year, we definitely need to start putting in place the capacity to do that in 22 and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I think you're muted.
I am talking away here. Sorry, I apologize. Thank you. No, I just wanted to say we have 3 more people, I believe. Nita Goswami, who has already spoke, would like to speak on behalf of Shatel Patel, who was scheduled to do yesterday, and I think she's just going to speak hers. So I do have 3 people left, and we'll do Shatel or Nita at the end. So Catherine Circioni. Catherine Cilicioni. Is Catherine there? Again, Catherine is there.
I'm sorry, Chair. The speaker was connected, but no longer is.
Okay, so if she is listening in any capacity, maybe she could call us back. The next is Anne Simpson Porco, or Porso.
Hi there.
Hi, Anne.
Thanks so much. My name is Anne, and I live in Ward 9. I grew up in Ward 3. And I first just want to thank the folks behind the buc@toronto.ca email and the tech team for providing this channel of communication for us. Thank you to everyone on this call for your work on the budget committee. You know, it's a big job. And thank you specifically to those who have been actively listening today to the deputations, last night, both the consistency of when Mayor Tory was here and when he was not. So thank you for actively listening and reflecting on the previous deputations and the content that they've raised. Going back to the importance of your work and of budgets, budgets dictate what gets done, obviously, what we place importance on. And so my deputation is more a question that, like, by not changing the budget allocated to the Toronto Police Services, I'm wondering how the budget committee can guarantee change for the City of Toronto and change in how the TPS operates. It would be astonishing to me if you don't believe that nothing has to change. So I'm just thinking that keeping the budget the same signals that you don't see a problem in how the TPS operates. While Black, Brown, and Indigenous residents who live, work, and pay taxes in Toronto have said that TPS does not keep them safe. Access to mental health services, affordable long-term housing, community-led transformative justice programs, and support for survivors of domestic violence are what build resiliency and safety in communities and are among the many viable alternatives to the Toronto Police Services. So at present, the TPS is playing so many roles that it's not best suited for. And that's kind of a generous cotton candy way of putting it. We have the deaths of Coco, Ijaz Chowdhury, DeAndre Campbell to remember in this. My best friend would certainly be on that list if she was not white, given the encounters that she's had with the police while being in mental health crises. And so the TPS has not delivered on its objective of serving and protecting every person in Toronto. In the budget, you have the choice to divert funds to programs that do support community safety. We have the ability to second Black Lives Matter Toronto's demand for reallocating $540 million from the Toronto Police Services budget and allocating it towards community supports and services. Community supports and services can build more resiliency, equity, and safety in our city compared to the current over-policing and militarization of the TPS. I know I'm not saying anything new, as many people have eloquently and wonderfully stated in the past deputations. But again, budgets indicate priorities and change. So by suggesting reforms instead of defunding, I think it's a skirting of the issue, and you would be enacting your very real power if you choose to do so. But it would be a trade-off, in my opinion, on the commitment to equity and to maintaining and building trust in public institutions that we know is especially important in polarizing times. So I just want to pause again on that question of, by not changing the budget allocated to the TPS, how does the budget committee guarantee change?
Thank you for your deputation. Any questions? Thank you very much. Just want to go back to see if Catherine Cirlicione is here. We've been trying to reach her.
I'm here.
Oh, Catherine, you are?
Can you hear me?
Great. Well,
yeah,
we can
sorry,
hear
my
you.
phone
You have
dropped
5
out.
minutes. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Catherine Cirlicione, and I'm here with Progress Toronto. I want to say that until very recently, I have never felt inclined to speak up against actions being taken by the government because it never felt like there was a point, and that listening to the needs and wants of constituents was not how government realistically functioned. But I decided to take the time I am privileged to have and make you listen anyways, and plan to do so more often in the future. So here goes. I am appalled, quite frankly, at the 2021 budget plan. This is not enough Encampments grow larger every day due to the lack of affordable housing, loss of income, shelters that are too full to be able to adequately home our citizens, and due to policies like Bill 184 and the weakening of tenants' rights. The likelihood we will see these encampments grow exponentially as we deal with the financial ramifications of COVID over possibly the next decade presses upon our government to take real and sustainable action, and this includes immediate winter survival kits as is being done in other provinces. Secondly, we are seeing a child care emergency. With so many closures and nonprofit care centers so financially strained, we are actively putting people in danger of losing their employment during already uncertain times. With prices being around $21,000 per year for an infant or $15,500 per year for a young child, on top of already outrageously high home prices, we are not only failing to set up our parents and their children for success, but putting them in danger. Women still shoulder the majority of the responsibilities in parenting, and the increase in violence against women by at least 12%, partly due to desperation of situation, is not the wake-up call you should require to offer adequate support. But here we are. Lastly, the police budget for 2021 is misguided at best. The many problems we have with the police system will not be solved by more or even minimal investment. And that has been proven after years of repeating the same mistake. Other countries are identifying the benefits of reallocating money away from militarization to support systems, and we are behind. And in demanding we repeat our mistakes, we are actively telling our racialized citizens that their experiences do not matter. We are putting lives in active danger, and we are putting police in situations where they just do not belong. It is beyond essential we reallocate these funds to services that can truly help our people and not punish them after we have failed them. I join my fellow deputants in asking for a 50% cut to the police budget. I'm asking that you demand more for your citizens that you represent and do what should have been done with the COVID-19 plan. Enough. We need more than enough, and look to you to make these vital and pressing decisions. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Any questions? So this, is Dave Mitchell still there at all? Dave Mitchell? Okay, we've been having some challenges with Dave. The last deputant will be, again, Nita Goswami, who's already deputed. She's going to depute on behalf of Shatel Patel. Nita, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. You have 5 minutes.
All right. So this is on behalf of Shatel, as she has 2 little kids and they had dental appointments, so she couldn't be here today. And she suggested me to present that. First, I would like to thank the committee for providing such a great opportunity to speak today. My name is Shatel Patel. Since 2016, I have been a member of the Woburn community in Scarborough. I am speaking to you today as someone who has been living in the same market rental apartment building since 2016. There are many issues that tenants in market rental housing face now and have been facing for many years. Let me share with you some of the issues so you get a good sense of what I mean. The water is often shut off for an entire day in our building, and that is more frequent, like 2-3 times, sometimes a week. And it is really difficult for me to save water for 8 hours, so we don't have so much of space and media to save such a huge amount of water for the whole day. Tenants often need repairs in their homes and call on the building management to do the necessary repairs. However, tenants often deal with delays and rude response when they call for repairs and maintenance work. In my own experience, once my apartment's ceiling fell down and the floor was full of building material. The superintendent came and patched the ceiling with garbage bags and duct tape and asked me to wait for further action. It took 10 days for them to fix the ceiling. This was scary for me as I have 2 little kids. I was even scared to use the washroom because I feared the ceiling might have fallen again. My apartment is full of humidity and the walls are always wet and windows are always dripping. Residents have reported problems to the landlord, but no action was taken for years. residents like me started accepting the fact that nothing is going to change, and we realized that we would have to do the repairs by ourselves. Window frames are often not sealed properly, and in the winter, cold air leaks through gaps. The heating in the building is not enough, and my kids have gotten sick so often during winter. I want the city to make some rules for the landlords to ensure that it is safe to live in our home. When housing repairs are not done, it affects our lives. Storm door of my balcony was broken and was taken away by the building management for more than a year. And during COVID and lockdown, it was impossible for us to get fresh air. It was extremely difficult for me to get my high energy kids outside on the balcony to have some fresh air. That had a huge impact on my kids and my mental health. Many of my friends and I didn't even know about the city budget and this presentation before. Thanks to the Scarborough Civic Action Network, I came to know about some of the resources that will be useful for me. Housing is very important for people's lives. I'm bringing these issues to your attention today in hope that you will create a city budget that will work to protect and support vulnerable tenants living in market rental housing. We need to ensure that our landlords follow the law and so that tenants can live safely and securely in their homes. Please adequately fund and support programs like Rent FTO to make sure tenants like myself and many others in Scarborough do not have to fear for our safety and health. Thank you everyone for listening to me, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nita. On behalf of Chatel, any questions? Seeing none, I appreciate that. Members, I think we are done for the day. I just want to confirm with clerks if they've had a chance to touch base with Dave Mitchell at all. I don't think so. Okay. Anyway, can I have a motion to receive the public presentations today? Councillor McKelvey, we'll move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We're in recess now till 1:30. Have a good lunch, everyone. Thank you.